Thank you very much for the forbearance, and I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Illinois.
We all agree water has consequences. We're going to bring in our Thursday morning political power panel, NBC News Hill correspondent Kelly O'Donnell, Democratic strategist, Angela Ryan, MSNBC contributor, and Republican strategist Susan Del Percio. Ladies, it's great to have you here. And Kelly, I want to start off with you, and let's talk first about what we witnessed in terms of the president and the idea of this chat and chew with Congressman Ryan. We have Politico talking about this, saying that the idea for the chat and chew came during an extended phone conversation between Obama and Ryan earlier this week. Is the wine and dine diplomacy going to be what turns around the gridlock that we've been witnessing in D.C.?
Well, it is being universally referred to as a positive step, because there were critics in both the president's own party and among Republicans who had said he had not done enough to reach out and build personal relationships. So he is clearly taking that seriously and has been extending himself quite a bit. Ryan's office did talk about, to me, the phone call earlier in the week and bringing this about. And why does it matter? When you sit down, get to know people, have a chance to talk about ideas without a lot of interference from the outside, not in a public setting. From what I'm told about last night's dinner, the mood was very positive. It got very substantive. Never at any point did it get contentious. That's a good starting point. We're at a place now where the election is over, where there is not an urgent sort of 11th hour deadline facing us. Obviously, the budget extension is critical, but we're not in a countdown clock mode. And it's a good use of the president's time to have these relationships, and Republicans need to attend. They are attending, and need to bring their own willingness to be participants with the president, which they've not always been so willing to do. So there's been some movement on both sides, and it is viewed as very positive.
And as we look at the dinner that we saw last night, and again, thumbs up, we saw John McCain, thumbs up there. The White House statement on that dinner saying the president greatly enjoyed the dinner and had a good exchange of ideas with senators. And Angela, I want you to listen to this, more of Senator Tom Coburn on Morning Joe.
You can't hold somebody with a boot on their neck and say, I want to talk to you, at the same time you're undermining their own position.
Is that a great analogy, a great way to visualize it for Americans around the country that haven't been able to understand the dynamics going on in Washington, D.C.? And as Kelly points out, the right has been begging to have a better personal connection with the president. So does this help foster that?
Well, I think that he's starting with in the right place. He's going to the senators on the Republican side, going into the rank and file and saying we need to figure out how to make a deal. You know, the top-down approach hasn't worked as well. We've seen that fail on the House side with Speaker Boehner. And so now you have a situation where the president is going back to his old former colleagues, some of them new, and saying, you know, we can work together. Unlike the Republican majority on the House side, you have people who are elected by the state, and therefore they're not ideologue, gerrymandered-based districts, and because of that, it is likely that the president will be able to compromise with them a little easier. And I think it's certainly clear that the White House, the staff, and the president are thinking along those same lines.
All right, so we are going to hear from Speaker Boehner coming up in just a short time as he holds his briefing later this morning, but we had an opportunity to see the speaker sit down with Larry Kudlow over at CNBC talking about exactly what you mentioned, Angela, the top-down approach and how it's not working for him. Look at this.
But hope springs eternal. I mean, a lot of people would like a deal out there.
Yeah, but I don't think it's the way to get to one, because you don't have enough member buy-in. Listen, two people hiding behind closed doors doesn't replicate 535 members of Congress, or the wisdom of 535 members of Congress, or for that matter, 300 million Americans.
All right, so Susan, coming up in the next hour, we know the lunch is going to be had with Congressman Ryan. Chris Van Hollen, Democratic congressman from Maryland, is going to be at that lunch as well. He's going to be our guest coming up in the next half hour. But we see the senatorial Republicans, the GOP senators, willing to move. Are the House Republicans, is that where the obstinance is going to set in, and that's why an important ally would be someone like Paul Ryan to the president?
He would be an important ally, but what is important is that starting from the Senate, if they could get a bipartisan agreement, there's so much pressure on Republicans now. They've taken a beating with the sequester. Their popularity is at an all-time low. So if they're forced to respond, because right now they've been saying, oh, the Senate hasn't passed a budget in 4 years, they haven't done this, they haven't done that. If they're forced to respond to the Senate, there may be more room for movement that way.
All right, and we want to talk about the fact that we've seen some movement. This is like Twilight Zone Thursday, because I'm about to say that the Democratic darling today is Rand Paul. And this is after he had this epic...
Disturbing you a little.
Well, it's not something we get to talk about regularly, calling him the Democratic darling, because he's getting a lot of praise from all sides on this. The New York Times, Gail Collins, saying that he is the talk of the town in reference to Paul's performance on Wednesday, saying it was different, an arresting combination of endurance, ego, and principle. Angela, is this something, as our first read points out, something that we would have seen no matter what? Rand Paul would have taken this position if it was a Republican president using drones.
You know, Thomas, I'm not sure that he would have taken the same position. I think what's really troubling about the filibuster is that this vote is still going to take place. Brennan will still be named CIA director, so I wonder, after 13 hours of, as he said, his feet hurting, his legs hurting, and him being very thirsty, what was really accomplished? At the end of the day, you know, Attorney General Holder sent a letter to Rand Paul on March 4th trying to answer a hypothetical scenario, trying to do the same thing with Senator Cruz in the judiciary hearing yesterday, where he goes around and around and around trying to answer these questions. Why, Thomas? Because this is the same man who experienced a very embarrassing situation last year with the Fast and Furious situation. He was held in contempt of Congress for no reason. So when you look at all that he's been through, it's no wonder why he's being very careful and selective with his words. They answered that Senate Intelligence. No, it's not. No, but he answered the Senate Intelligence Committee with the documents. This is a very particularized, you know, scary matter. You have to handle it delicately. I have a Homeland Security background, and I know that firsthand. So you can't
What I'm talking about is the Senate has a role to try to hold the executive branch to account, and that was the purpose here. There was nothing that had to do with relationships from Fast and Furious. This is about the drone policy. I also think Rand Paul would have done it if a Republican were in the White House. This is a very narrow issue about how drones might be used. Could they be used in the U.S.? Could they be used against an American citizen? Not at a time of imminent threat, not on a 9/11 day, but on a day when you would spot that supposed terrorist going about his or her life. And that's the scenario. And that's why Democrats supported what Rand Paul did in principle. Not that they necessarily wanted to join him with all those hours on the floor, but the idea that this is a policy that needs definition. And so they have asked the White House and the Attorney General to be more specific. The Attorney General did give an answer saying the White House has no intention to use drones in that way. And the Senator and some of his supporters believe that that is not definitive enough. That's what this was about.
One thing that, Angela, as you asked, you know, what did this prove, the filibuster? One thing that Rand Paul said that it did prove was that bipartisanship still exists in Washington, D.C. by sending out this tweet saying it does exist in D.C. thanks to Ron Wyden heading to the floor to speak on congressional oversight of executive branch. Senator Ron Wyden being the only one, Susan, democratically elected to come to the floor yesterday and continue the filibuster in an effort that got the 13 hours.
And I agree with Kelly. There's no doubt that Rand Paul would have done this regardless if there was a Republican in the White House. However, you wouldn't have seen other Republicans joining, and perhaps you would see more Democrats joining him publicly. Because
that's a fair point.
I mean, right now, that's what we're looking at. We're seeing that Democrats have a big problem with this issue, but they don't want to go against the president publicly right now.
All right, thanks to my power panel today, Kelly O'Donnell, Angela Ryan, Susan Del Percio. Much appreciated.